Sarah, thank you so much for joining the Grace Curley Show.
Thanks for having me.
Sarah, I want to start with Kamala Harris, because I know you've written a lot about where she is on the border crisis, and that is to say she is MIA. Now, there's reports that she may actually be picking up some of these responsibilities. Do you think that's because of backlash, or do you think that this kind of long waiting game was always part of the plan?
Well, I think the announcement today of her trip soon to the Northern Triangle, she's let slip that she will soon, on an unspecified time, be visiting Mexico and Guatemala. That seems to be a reaction to the criticism that she's been MIA on the crisis. But she still hasn't previewed any plans to visit the border, and the White House today was defending that decision because they really tried to remove her from the actual migrant crisis and the overcrowded detention facilities and everything that we're seeing on the border. They've really tried to insist that she's just focusing on the diplomatic outreach to those Northern Triangle countries, and that she's just tasked with dealing with the root causes of migration. But critics would argue that the migrant surge on the border, that situation is inextricably linked with the problems in the Northern Triangle countries, and that it doesn't really make sense to unwind the two just to protect her politically.
Yeah, and Sarah, I know this is kind of a losing game, but I always think to myself, reverse this. If this were during the Trump administration and he wasn't going to the border, or VP Pence was not going to the border, there would be a huge outcry. But just this week, I saw stories about how wonderful it is that Kamala Harris was at yarn stores and that she was at a bakery in Chicago. The priorities here seem to be very mixed up.
Right. That has sort of been a constant criticism of the way the Biden administration has handled it. They are seeing surges of border crossings that have eclipsed what was going on when this was appropriately called a crisis during the Trump administration. But there's been a lot of resistance in the media and among Democrats to label what's going on as a crisis. And the White House really tried to get away with blaming the problems on the Trump administration. That doesn't hold up under scrutiny because obviously the Biden administration undid a lot of what Trump had done right when they came into office, and that's exactly when this historic surge of migration began. So it's not a difficult line to follow of causation there, and yet the Biden administration has really not made this a priority at all and have not really owned the crisis. And you see in the way that they are trying to insulate Kamala Harris from having any responsibility for something they're in no rush to fix, it tells you that they recognize this is politically difficult.
Yes, that it's putting them in a little bit of a pretzel. Sarah, just a heads up, you are cutting in and out just a little bit. I do want to play for you, and you just mentioned this, that aides and a lot of the Biden administration have been stressing that Harris's role will be limited to diplomatic outreach for the Northern Triangle countries. In fact, one of the senior aides of the Biden administration, I believe her name is Simone Sanders, said Harris is not doing the border or something along those lines. With that being said, Sarah, I would love to get your input on this. I believe we have Kamala Harris speaking about, you have to hear this, Sarah. Let us know what you think. This is Kamala Harris speaking about why migrants feel they have to come to America when really they don't want to.
They don't want to leave the place where their grandparents lived. They don't want to leave the place where they are familiar with the culture and the language. You know, to use a phrase from an old television show, Cheers, you know, where everybody knows your name. Most people don't want to leave home.
What do you think, Sarah? She's referencing Cheers in this conversation about the Northern Triangle.
She is, and I think, the Biden administration has tried to downplay the extent to which their comments about immigration and opening the border and welcoming people have been a big driver of the surge that we're seeing. The Biden campaign ran on a really liberal immigration policy that was not in name, but in function, an open borders policy. And they immediately came into office with rhetoric about stopping construction of the border wall, ending the Remain in Mexico policy, ending the cooperative asylum agreements that the Trump administration had set up with Central American countries, tearing up everything that the Trump administration had done. And that sent a signal to would-be migrants that it's a great time to cross the border right now because the Biden administration has made it so much easier and they're going to welcome us. And so, the rhetoric that we've heard from the Biden administration is starting to change. Now they're starting to try to discourage people from coming. But that was the attitude that they brought to the table that caused this crisis.
Yeah, and when I hear her talk about Cheers and that theme song, You Want to Go Where Everybody Knows Your Name, it's kind of, for me, it really speaks to how they've been handling almost every problem, which is they're just appealing to people's feelings and emotions and everything's so feel good and funny and ha-ha, but they don't really have a plan. And Sarah, I'm speaking with Sarah Westwood from the DC Examiner. I want to move on here for a minute and ask you about this situation with Georgia voting laws, because you have a great piece in the Washington Examiner where you break down how Georgia's new voting laws compare to other states. And I think this is really helpful. You put this out last Thursday. It's good for people to see, because when a lot of times my listeners say, what do I say to people when they argue at this point? Like, you want to be prepared. You want to have your facts straight. And this is a great way to compare what's happening in Georgia and all of this fake outrage versus other states and their voting laws. But my question for you is, when you see a piece like this, so there's a piece in the New York Times, it says hundreds of companies unite to oppose voting limits, but others abstain. What do you think of this narrative that now all of these companies are going to basically bully politicians into avoiding these restrictive voting laws, when based off your writing, it doesn't seem like they're any more restrictive than a lot of other states?
Right. I think what happened in Georgia was you saw liberal activists notch a really high-profile victory when they pressured Major League Baseball to move the All-Star game. And seeing how effective that was, now they are actively trying to bully other corporations into taking those kinds of stands. But a lot of that is based off of just true misinformation. I mean, the Georgia law, on balance, expands access to voting in Georgia in virtually every way. I mean, there are more days that people could vote early and in person. Ballot drop boxes are now authorized for the first time under the law. It is not a voter ID provision that is attached to mail-in voting. You can use the last four digits of your Social Security number if you are a person who doesn't happen to have an ID. And so the characterization of this law as being somehow historically restrictive just isn't based in fact. And in fact, it is more permissive in many ways than the voting laws in other states like New York or like Delaware, which does not have any in-person early voting days available to it, for example. And you are going to start seeing Democratic groups file lawsuits and put pressure on other state legislatures. That's happening in Texas. That's happening in Arizona, where they are considering similar minor administrative reforms. It's going to be an interesting battle to see how states are able to stand up to this pressure to try to return to some of the pre-COVID normals in terms of the way they administered elections.
And Sarah, this is moving out a little bit from the actual voting laws, but something I notice is, so let's say the Major League Baseball All-Star game gets pulled out of Atlanta. That community, which is primarily mostly black people, suffers. They don't get the resources, the revenue that would bring in. And now we're seeing this even more because Will Smith just pulled the production of one of his movies out of Atlanta. And it seems to be all to placate these liberal, mostly white elite politicians or blue check marks. And the people that it's actually hurting are the same people that these, heroes claim to care so much about.
That's right. I mean, this reflects a total lack of regard for how even Georgia citizens are feeling. Because, first of all, the law has polled well among members of the public. The majority of people support the kinds of reforms that Georgians pursued. And the people getting hurt by these boycotts, getting hurt in a real, material, economic way, are the same ones that the liberal activists who are pushing these boycotts are claiming they're trying to help. And, the tactic, though, has been very effective in drawing attention to the Georgia law. And so you are starting to see those same tactics materialize in other states where the law hasn't passed yet. So they might ratchet up in places like Texas the pressure to try to stop the legislation. Because in Georgia, it's too late. It's the law. So a lot of these boycotts, to some, can feel performative because it's not going to change at this point. It's not a draft. It's a law. And in other states, that's just not the case because it's still working its way through the legislature.
Thank you so much, Sarah C. Westwood. That's where you can find her on Twitter. She is the politics and investigations reporter for the Washington Examiner. You guys should read all of her pieces. They're really great, really detailed. We thank you so much for joining the show, Sarah. We hope to have you on again very soon.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I know what you guys are thinking, because there's the old expression, there's no such thing as a free lunch. You've heard this, Jared.
I have.
Well, it's not true.
I have experienced that myself.
I am here as the Daniel Dale of the Grace Curley Show to tell you that that is false. Here's the real story. With my friends at Aviva Trattoria, we'll be giving away a free lunch every other Friday here at the studio. I will be giving away one this Friday. I'm so excited. I'm excited to give one away, but on the Fridays where I'm picking a winner, that means Aviva's not going to be in studio. And that does make me sad because every time they come in, wow, the spread is incredible. And what we've been doing lately is we pick the winner and then we have the winner peruse the menu. And so they get to pick some of their choices. And our VIPs have great taste. I'm talking calamari, pizza, chicken clubs, chicken wings, short ribs. Everything is so delicious. Gnocchi. The food is incredible. And you guys know I love the house-made chips. Those are my personal favorite. All you have to do to enter is go to gracecurleyshow.com and sign up. I'll be selecting winners this Friday. And when they come in with the food, you guys, it steals the show. Last time I actually had to tell the women who were here, you guys know you can come back in and watch the show, but they were just digging the food. That was like the highlight. From seafood to their homemade pasta, Aviva has you covered. They also have 4 convenient locations in Marlborough, Maynard, Wrentham, and Westford. Takeout is available too. Again, to enter to win the Aviva VIP lunch, go to gracecurleyshow.com. It drops down when you go on the website and you just put in your email. It's gracecurleyshow.com. We'll be back on the other side. I'll open up the phone lines and 844-500-4242. This is the Grace Curley Show.
You can call her late for dinner. Just don't call her Gracie. It's the Grace Curley Show.